Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and all that Charlie said was really nice, but the reality is I have a job with a shelf life of 18 more months, so I'm doing a tryout here for talk show host, so I hope it goes well. Okay, a lot of times when you talk to somebody who's really smart, you leave thinking, wow, that's really complex and difficult. But when you talk to somebody that I think is really, really insightful and smart, you leave thinking, okay, I understand the simple, basic truths behind that. And that is, I think, Fred Smith's genius. He understands a very complicated and complex business and world, but when you talk to him, you walk away with an understanding of here are the simple, basic facts, and that's why I think we're in for a treat today. So, Fred, thank you. On behalf of Tennessee, it's hard to imagine a Tennessee without FedEx. So let me just start with thanking you for that as well as coming today.
Well, I appreciate that, Governor. Glad to be here. Take a point of personal privilege, if you wouldn't mind. I think Clint Day, are you out here in this audience?
Right over here.
Where is he?
Right over here to your left.
He and I were in Vietnam together. How you doing,
Wow.
fella? Semper Fi. My daughter Kathleen and her husband Matt are in here. Kathleen's the mother of triplets, which is extraordinary. You've never seen anything quite like that. And then another one of my daughters was the First Lady's flower girl at St. Mary's, so we got a lot of connections.
Who's here? My wife Chrissy is here too, so thanks.
Well, great.
All right, let me start with a 30,000-foot view, if you will. Tell us, how do you feel about the economy today in the U.S. and internationally?
I think the economy in the U.S. is moving along at the same pace it's been the last several years, Governor. It's 2% GDP, $150,000 to $200,000 new jobs per month on average. That sounds like a lot, but it's really just keeping up with the number of increased population. The labor participation rate is still far below where it's been. Lots of people want full-time and they got part-time jobs, and you know this better than anybody. The specter of healthcare looms over us all, but the economy worldwide is relatively good in Asia, driven mostly by China. Some of that's made up, quite frankly. Fake economy, I guess, so we could coin a new term to borrow a phrase. I think Europe is getting better, but the United States got to have tax reform and regulatory reform for us to get any substantial growth above a couple of percentage points.
So let me go there. You talked about a fake economy, if you will. You have your,
China.
What's that?
China.
No, I understand, right?
Yeah.
Clear. To be clear, China. You have your second largest hub there, though, right?
The largest offshore hub we have is in Paris at Charles de Gaulle. The next one is Guangzhou in the headwaters of the Pearl River Valley, just west of Shenzhen, and Hong Kong. It's the manufacturing cradle of China. Very big operation.
Okay. All right, let me shift a little bit. Obviously, you have a room full of entrepreneurs and folks focused on technology. You started FedEx in a day where there wasn't fax machines, there wasn't internets, there wasn't an internet. How have you adjusted the company as you've gone along? I mean, when you wrote out your famous business plan that didn't get the world's best grade at Yale, you couldn't have possibly anticipated this world. How have you adjusted as you've gone along?
Well, first, let me set the record straight, Governor. You brought up the grade I got. It was a C, which was a damn good grade for me. So I didn't take it quite the way it's been. All kidding aside, the original paper was really about the automation of society and how it was going to have a completely different logistics system. Once you automate something, you can't call in a few part-time people and do the job. The machines got to work, whether it's an automated cockpit, a diagnostic machine at a hospital, the computers that were just beginning to manage the banking system. And so that was the original idea. It wasn't until I came back from Vietnam that I came up with the idea of how to solve the problem. So it's sort of an apocryphal story, but as I hope I demonstrated, I know the value of a good yarn to take advantage of. But the fundamental issue about FedEx was that it was the backbone of the technologically based society. And while we've done all kinds of things horizontally expanding across the world, some through acquisition, some through our own, we've vertically expanded. We're now in the ground parcel business. We have a retail arm. We have a freight arm. Fundamentally, that core recognition that modern, high-tech, high-value industries have to have a different type of logistics system is at the centerpiece of what FedEx does.
So how have you stayed technologically innovative as you've done that? I mean, you went from being literally a startup to now a $58 billion company. A lot of people lose the innovation aspect when they get that big. How have you done it?
Well, one of the things that if you study history, and I love history, and I like to think I'm a student of it, that is constant is the necessity of change. And I wrote our manager's guide, our management book that we train our folks on many years ago. And I started off with a quote from Marcus Aurelius, who lived 2,000 years ago. Now, we think things were pretty stable then, you know, horses and chariots and wagons and so forth. But in fact, there were a lot of technological innovations that were brought about by the Romans, you know, construction methodologies and geometry innovations and so forth. So I use a quote from Marcus Aurelius that says, the only thing constant about life is change. So I figured if a guy who lived over 2,000 years ago could figure that out, we could and should communicate that to everybody who made up the FedEx team, whether it was the original small group or now almost 500,000 people around the world. So we embrace change, and at the heart of change is innovation. Because if you don't innovate, quite frankly, you die. And we reward innovation, we encourage innovation, we don't punish innovation attempts that fail.
So, but let me stop you saying, but how do you reward innovation in that larger structure? Because some of those innovative, creative people can think, I can go do something on my own, and I won't be limited within a salary structure of a Fortune 10 company.
And some of them do. And that's a great thing for them if that's what they want to do. But I think there are a lot of people inside the FedEx system that understand that we value innovation, we'll fund innovation, we'll take a chance, and that's hard to find, as you just mentioned, in a lot of very large companies. Yeah. But it's such a part of our cultural fabric, I don't think anybody has any compunction about taking up the chain of command. You know, I got this really strange idea, and because they don't think we're going to laugh at it at all, we're going to listen to it intently, and if it's a good idea, we're going to give it a whirl. One of my favorite quotes is from a professor at Harvard, Rosabeth Moss Kanter, and she calls it kaleidoscope thinking. You know how a kaleidoscope, you look in there and you see eagles and turtles and one thing or another? Lots of things in business are sort of obvious, but you can't see them, but you got to keep twisting that kaleidoscope, and all of a sudden, wow, there it is. Now, maybe it's because technology has come along, but that conceptual leap is at the center of most innovation. I can't fly faster than the speed of sound. Well, you know, if you put a tail that moves entirely rather than, you know, the old elevator, and you sweep the wings, damn right you can go the speed of sound. I can't get to the moon. Jules Verne's concept of a rocket going to the moon, it won't work, energy won't, you can't carry enough. Well, if you break the rocket into 3 parts and throw 2 of them away, you can get to the moon. So some of the things that we take for granted, we're just twisting that kaleidoscope and looking at things a little bit differently. Now, a great deal of innovation obviously depends on fundamental science, physics, and what Einstein developed, Newton developed, but an awful lot of it is just seeing things from a slightly different perspective.
So you don't have to just innovate with technology, but the competitive landscape changes, right? So
yeah.
two companies that I'm assuming have been or maybe still are biggest customers are also competitors. Amazon, I think, has bought a fleet of planes and their trucks and everything else. I'm assuming they're a fairly large customer of FedEx. Walmart's now talking about having employees take goods from stores the last mile to home. So how do you stay innovative, not just in the technically changing world, but where competitors and customers can be one and the same?
Well, one of the best pieces of advice I can give anybody about how to manage a company and how to deal with those types of threats and opportunities, sometimes they're one and the same, as you mentioned, co-opetition, that sort of thing. Just go pull up Michael Porter's diagram of I forget what he calls it, strategic ecosystem or the strategic imperative, where you see that all enterprises have challenges on the input side. Can you be technologically obsoleted? Can your customers exert more power over you than is wise, and so forth? You look at Professor Porter's diagram, and every day you go into that office and you're looking at, is this an opportunity or is this a threat, and one thing or another, then you'll come out with the right conclusions. Now, one of the myths is, and I saw a quote the other day by a very sophisticated publication, the Wall Street Journal, and said, gosh, Amazon is successful because it put its retailing together with logistics. Well, Sam Walton sat in my office one day and made one of the most self-deprecating remarks I ever heard anybody make, particularly somebody who's worth $100 billion, whatever the hell it was. He said he didn't think he was much of a retailer, but he thought he was a pretty damn good logistician. So Walmart was built around a very innovative logistics system that was almost the antithesis of what Sears and Kmart had done. And what Amazon recognized was the profundity of mobile devices where you could see products displayed, and then they took advantage of that to use direct shipping to come at things from a different channel. So their logistics footprint is unique to Amazon, but it's really an adjunct of the retailing, not the other way around. So if you look at FedEx's business, the vast majority of our business is not e-commerce. 85% plus is business to business. It's defibrillators, it's airplane parts, it's auto parts, it's diagnostic kits, it's the replenishments for various companies and retail supplies and so forth. We do a lot of e-commerce, but it's still only about 12% of the retail landscape. So it's not quite as big a thing as the popular press likes to depict it. And my guess is it'll sort of flatten off because no tree goes to the sky. So you just have to be very realistic about it. But most importantly, you have to understand how logistics actually work, and not the way the popular press may think they work.
Let me shift gears a little bit now, and we'll come back to that later. But shift gears a little bit. You started the company in Memphis for a variety of reasons, one of which it was your home. If you were starting the business again today, I'm asking a vulnerable question here. I hope I know the answer. They said never to ask a question unless you know the answer. But if you're starting the business again today, do you put it in Memphis?
Yeah, you might be interested to know, particularly people here in the Nashville audience, if you want to connect every point in the United States to every other point in the United States with 500-mile-an-hour airplanes connected through a hub and spokes switching hub and an integrated pickup and delivery fleet, you have to put that hub someplace in a trapezoid between Memphis, St. Louis, Cincinnati, and Nashville, Tennessee. If you go any further west or south or north, you can't make the connect. One part of the country doesn't work. So in the last analysis, the two finalists for the original FedEx hub was Memphis and Smyrna, just south of here, the old Air Force thing. They both were underutilized former Air Force facilities. Yeah. And yes, I was from Memphis, and the head of the airport commission believed in us, but the biggest reason by far that we ended up in Memphis is because there was far more fog at Smyrna in those days than in Memphis. Now today we can land basically impervious to fog, but that wasn't the case in those days. So if you had 20 or 30 nights where you couldn't operate, you couldn't exactly go out and promote absolutely positively overnight.
Yeah.
And
unless it's foggy.
And I think in the 40-something years that FedEx has been operating, we've probably not been able to operate in the Memphis hub and I think this is probably a total of maybe 15 hours. Wow. And that's mostly for ice. And wow. A couple of times maybe we had bizarre weather and had some fog. But now, subsequent to that, Memphis got so big, we've sort of broken off. We have a big hub in Indianapolis. We have a big hub in Fort Worth. We have a big hub in Newark and a big hub in Oakland and smaller hubs in Greensboro, Chicago, LAX, and we've got pretty good size hubs for Latin America in Miami and for Asia in Anchorage, Alaska.
Wow. So I'll put on my Tennessee sales hat for a little while. Memphis obviously won that deal and won FedEx and all that's meant, and I can't overstate how important it is. We have a lot of healthcare companies and other things that are located in Memphis because their customers need the product overnight. But the runner-up in that competition, Smyrna, is now home to the largest automobile plant in the history of the Americas, where Nissan produces 800,000 vehicles a year. So
for many of the same demographic reasons, yeah. Except the jet airplane didn't equate to it. The corridor between Memphis and Nashville, as you well know, Governor, is the most, it's the Rosetta Stone of the American logistics system because of the way the highways and the railroads and the bridges all lay out.
Another question real quick, and then we'll go back. Not only did you make your hometown, and I know you did it for business reasons, but the home of FedEx, but you've stayed really involved there. These are folks that are starting or will start or have started companies. Talk to me a little. You guys have invested tremendously. You do all over the world, but you've made a point of saying we're committed to Memphis and investing in it as a community. Tell me why that makes sense.
Well, we have about 35,000 employees in Memphis, so clearly it's a big thing to us that we have a great quality of life, that we have a safe and secure city and a prosperous city. So we've tried to support the various amenities that make a great city. Plus, we've tried to help to the extent that we can promote entrepreneurship. And more recently, we've been very involved in what's called the Epicenter and the Logistics Accelerator, which are trying to fund new startup businesses and entrepreneurs in our local area, because from one of those can spring a Google or an Amazon or a FedEx or a Holiday Inn, whatever the case may be. But it's philanthropy in some degree, but it's also hard-headed evaluation of the environment in which we operate. We got to recruit great talent into FedEx. We have almost 8,000 IT people, for instance, many of them in Shelby County out in Collierville, but we have many others in Colorado and Florida and Texas. So that's why we're very supportive of the innovation and entrepreneurship efforts inside Memphis.
So let me shift again, staying kind of on the somewhat personal side. It's rare that somebody would start a company and still be leading it when it's a $58 billion company with 400,000 employees. Am I in the ballpark, something like that?
It's almost 500,000.
Okay, so
if you take all the FedEx system, now some places like Israel and other parts of the world, Indonesia, they'll be branded FedEx and it'll be a partner of ours. But if you take the entire system, it's like 470,000 people.
So to the same person that started, it's leading it when it's 58 billion and 475,000 employees. What are a lot of people say those are two wholly different skill sets. What are the critical things that have been the reasons for the success of FedEx when you started it and still today? For you as the leader.
Yeah. Well, I think to some degree people look at that around business and find that to be unusual, and I guess it is. But in a lot of other fields, it's not so unusual. I don't know of any four-star general that didn't start off as a second lieutenant. So to go from second lieutenant to four-star general, and the pyramid gets very small up at the top, you have to study, learn the lessons of history, find people to emulate, be willing to change, learn how to delegate, learn how to state with clarity what you're trying to achieve. And the higher you go and the bigger the organization, the better you have to be at all of those things. The same thing's true in, the football business. I know that a little bit. My son Arthur here is the tight ends coach of the Tennessee Titans. Go Titans next fall. I think they're going to be very good. But most people that become great coaches, they played football. Yeah. And then they were a tight ends coach, and then maybe they're offensive coordinator, and then they end up, some of them, like Tom Landry or Bill Belichick, as geniuses. So they've gone through that continuum, and I don't look at what I've done any different than those examples I just gave you. I did change a lot. I did study a lot. I did try to avail myself of the lessons of history and other people that made those transitions from sort of small to big enterprises. And I just think it's discipline and objectivity and the willingness to do those things I just mentioned to you.
You recognize someone who served with you in Vietnam.
Well, they told me he was in there. We neither one of us have probably recognized him one another. Quite been a long time, 50 years, but.
But I'm curious, lessons you learned in the military that applied as you grew FedEx?
Oh, absolutely. If you go to the internet, go Google up my name, Frederick W. Smith, and quote, look in there and it says what the Marine Corps taught me. And it's a little article I wrote in 2008 for the Naval Institute Proceedings, which is the technical journal of the Naval Services. And it just tells what I learned in the Marine Corps in terms of leadership principles, and the Marine Corps is the best at it. The other services are excellent too, but, semper fidelis. And so it was hugely important because the Marine Corps tells you how you go about motivating people to withdraw that discretionary effort up to and including risking their lives, and that's the big part of military leadership. So a lot of things I did in the Marine Corps, obviously I'd just soon not remember, but because that was a tough way to make a living in those days, as Clint will tell you. But the principles I learned in the Marine Corps about leadership and management, that's a different matter, and I've always valued those greatly.
Shift back to the world stage, a lot of conversation around, from Brexit to America's trade policies, which are in question. Speaking just globally, what are the dangers of withdrawing within ourselves?
Well, I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal's op-ed page last March. It's on our website, but it's a history, Governor, of the United States' involvement in trade. And a lot of people don't know this, but the United States' global involvement in large measure was designed by a Tennessean, Cordell Hull. Cordell Hull was the longest serving Secretary of State in the history of the United States. When Franklin Roosevelt was elected President of the United States, we had just begun to have an enormous depression. And that depression can be tracked almost directly back to a piece of legislation passed by a senator and a congressman by the name of Smoot-Hawley. And Smoot-Hawley began to put up trade barriers, and our trade in this country collapsed by 60% in less than 2 years. And the first thing that Roosevelt and Cordell Hull did was to recognize what a mistake Smoot-Hawley had been, and they passed a bill in 1934. I believe it was called the Trade Adjustment Act. I may have the nomenclature wrong, but you can look it up. And it restored the status quo smoot hawley, and it was hugely important. After World War II, it was Hull's architecture that largely built the United Nations, Bretton Woods, the IMF and the World Bank, and most importantly, what was called then the GATT, the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade, which became the World Trade Organization in 1994. Now, 26.5% of every economic activity in the United States is related to trade. About 12%, 12.5% export, and about 14% import. The president finds imports somehow as they win, we lose. That's not borne out in facts. Mercantilism and protectionism, and there's been a lot of that by Japan and China, that's a different matter. But we all benefit from being able to buy automobiles that are produced in Tennessee and Chattanooga by Volkswagen, and the parts and pieces that they may build in Germany to give us a selection of a Volkswagen versus an Audi versus a Chevrolet versus a Ford. So trade has been an enormously beneficial thing for the United States in particular and for the world in general. And as Cordell Hull famously said, when goods cross borders, armies rarely do. So it is important that the United States not give up on trade, and despite the president's rhetoric on this during the campaign, I think the reality of that has set in on him, as is evidenced by many of the things that are actually happening.
And so as people engaged in the economy, what's your advice to them when there's political arguments that are great political arguments? Okay, you couldn't get either candidate to touch TPP with a 10-foot pole during the election, even though I'm pretty confident you think it's
no, I gave a speech on it in December the 9th in full-throated support of TPP.
So what's your advice for this audience about how to engage on those issues that politically sound good but aren't really good ideas?
Well, Governor, you've forgotten more about this particular subject than I have, but as you know very well, politics is a sport that is conducted on the margin. I mean, you've got your base on the left and you've got your base on the right, so the question is, how do you get the people mobilized inside, and then right on the finite edge, how do you move those people just a little bit? So most of the comments about trade during the campaign were just hyperbole. They didn't have any bearing in truth. They sound great to somebody who doesn't really understand it, know it, take the time to study on it. Trade was blamed for I think the president keeps talking about 70,000 factories, being abandoned or what have you. Well, there are thousands, tens of thousands of businesses that are created and go out of business every year. And most of them go out of business because there's a more effective competitor or technology has made them go out of business. 85% of every job lost in the United States over the past 25 years has been because of automation, not because of trade.
Right.
So if you don't like the fact that a machine can answer your telephone today, it did away with an awful lot of telephone operator jobs. The mechanization of agriculture took our economy from 70% agricultural based at the end of the Civil War to 2% or less today, and we have more food than we can possibly use and export billions of dollars of it. So I just think that the sound bites that are used in these national political campaigns, I think the great thing about being a governor like you is the geography is finite enough that you can actually go out there and talk to people and not just give them sound bites. But the reality, as I said, is that 26.5% of every economic activity in the United States, whether it's buying a Nissan automobile, or a Samsung phone or any of the other things you can think of that were made overseas and perhaps designed here. It's an integral part of our modern life, and we're not going to pull up drawbridges and not trade with the rest of the world. It's just not going to happen.
We've got 8 or 9 minutes left. Let's shift a little bit back to the personal. You can tell one of the things about Fred, like I said, is he knows a lot about a lot of things, and one of that is you've mentioned several times you love history. You've mentioned everybody from Marcus Aurelius to Cordell Hull just while we've been sitting here. So I'm imagining if I'm one of these folks, say, well, that sounds great, but you know, I'm up to my ears and trying to start this business. I'm trying to, you know, raise my family. I'm trying to be a decent spouse or partner, whatever. I'm curious. I mean, you've built this business. You have accomplished children. And yet you found time to be a reader and a learner. How have you done it?
Well, I guess you just do what you like, Governor. I've always been interested in history and the lessons therein, and I'm fascinated by a lot of historical figures. So it's just something I like. I was in the car the other day listening to my radio, and this thing came on and said, well, you need to get Blinkit.com. I think that's what it said. But you can get, it's like the cliff notes of every book. So I think I'm going to subscribe to Blinkit.com if that were right. But
somebody should buy their stock right now.
Well, I may have it wrong, too. I mean, as I told you, my hearing isn't all that great. But look, if you don't absorb the lessons of history, as the famous saying goes, you're going to make the same mistakes that were made in history. So if you want to develop a company or be an effective public servant or something, and you don't look at the lessons of history, it can be catastrophic. I mentioned the Vietnam War earlier when I first came in here. I was watching book notes one night with Brian Lamb, who interviewed authors on this weekly show, and he interviewed this guy that had British brigadier who had done a history of General Giap, who was the famous Vietnamese general that beat the French at Dien Bien Phu. And Lamb asked this author at the end, was there anything that surprised you? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, there was. And this is on the internet. You can go read the transcript of this. I'm not making it up. He said, I asked General Westmoreland, had he read any of the prolific French literature about the Indochina Wars right before the Americans got involved. He said General Westmoreland looked at him and said, no, he hadn't read a word of it. Now think about that. And of course, the strategy that he pursued, in retrospect, and the older I get, the more I realize it was idiotic. And so you have to, if you want to play at a high level, whether it's politics or medicine, or sports, or business, you have to absorb the lessons of history, or you're going to make a terrible mistake that has already been made before, because there's been a lot of things done in human history that are there for the asking in terms of reading about them.
Is there a mistake that you made in the early stages of FedEx that you'd be willing to share, that looking back?
You know, Governor, I made so damn many mistakes in so damn many different ways.
Yeah, we can tell it barely worked out.
No, I tell you what, I've had a philosophy in life that you learn from your mistakes and you internalize those and you keep focused on the future, because if you don't do that, you become consumed with the past. You know, again, talking about the Marine Corps, I'm sure like Clint, I'm very proud of being in the Marine Corps. I cherish its heritage and so forth, but I don't dwell on it for lots of reasons. And I think that's true of the mistakes. You just internalize them, mark them up, and keep forward.
Fair enough. Any advice, though, to, like I said, a room full of people that are starting or thinking about starting a business? Any just general, like, all right, I wish my 45-year younger self would have known this?
Well, I think I could give a few things that you have to do to be successful in starting a business. Maybe that'll be the best way to put it. First thing is you have to be very objective about what you're trying to do and have to have a business concept that has a competitive advantage. I mean, there's no sense, quite frankly, in starting a business that 10 other people are doing the same thing, because you're going to be able to make a living, but that's at best what you're going to be able to do. So if it's in real estate, maybe you have the killer location for whatever it is, if for your restaurant or what have you, but you have to have a point of differentiation and competitive advantage, and you've got to be damn sure that your innovation or your thought has that competitive advantage and you can sustain it. When I was putting together FedEx, Federal Express in those days, way back when, I commissioned, and I didn't really have the money to do it, not one, not two, but 3 completely separate and independent studies to verify the market that I thought that existed for these high-tech and high-value-added parts and pieces that had no way to be moved at that point. You know, technology was outrunning the logistics system. So I was very sure that the solution that we had was competitively superior, and it was. It just sold like gangbusters. The only thing that really created problems for us, Governor, was the Arab oil embargo, which happened right when we were starting up, and that created all kinds of hell, but we got through it, and it was where I was really introduced to Washington and its vagaries, and learned a lot about it, because fuel became regulated, and we didn't have any record of using it, so that was a real sales job to try to convince them to give us fuel allocation. That's number one, though. You've got to make sure your idea is sound and it's a defensible, sustainable position. Second thing you need to do if you're going to do this, if you're going to go into business, is that you have to get good people. You can't do it by yourself. It takes a team to do anything. That's really the secret of FedEx. And you got to treat those people fairly, and you got to cut them in to some of the upside reward. That'd be the second thing that I think you should do. Third thing I would advise you to do, which is extremely important, is remember, business is just about arithmetic. It isn't arms and legs. It isn't life and death. It's just math. And so if you're going to be all consumed over money, you got problems ahead. So you just have to be objective about business. It's an endeavor, but it's nothing like the important part of life, which is family, faith, things of that nature. So that'd be the third thing. And then I would say the fourth thing, which is very important, you better be prepared to work hard. And work hard, but take the time off, particularly to deal with your personal relationships. And finally, the fifth thing, and I've found this may be the most important thing of all, have a sense of humor. If you take yourself too seriously, you're not going to be successful in much of anything. So what you're doing is important, but don't take yourself too seriously. So those are the 5 pieces of advice that I would give any nascent entrepreneur.
So competitive advantage, hire great people, understand that it's just math, work really hard, and have a sense of humor.
Well, work really hard, but keep your key values in place there with the money part of it. You know, just don't let it start ruling you, because at the end of the day, your health, your family, that's a lot more important. If you make it in business, great, it's fun, but it's not the main thing.
Like I said, when I started, Oliver Wendell Holmes said, I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity this side of complexity, but I would give the whole world for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. So I think what you had a chance to hear somebody who has worked through the complexity to put it back in a real simple, understandable, here's why FedEx has become, I think, the greatest company in Tennessee and throughout the world. So I'll end by thanking Fred. You know, when you travel around the world recruiting business to Tennessee, people know, they know Jack Daniels, they know Dolly Parton, they know Elvis, and they know FedEx. And we're grateful for that. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Governor. Thank you.